Hello, everyone. I think we'll get started. And the webinar is being recorded. So if you miss this start, you'll and join later during the live stream, you can certainly watch the recording. We'll make sure it gets out to everybody. So I want to welcome my co-presenter, Faye. We're here to talk to you about the secrets of super sales teams. And first of all, explain a little bit about ourselves and introduce ourselves, but then we'll get started. It's very content rich. There's a lot of learnings in our presentation today, and we're excited to be sharing it with you all. I know I am. So my name's David. I'm the CEO at Sentia, based here in San Francisco, and I'm joined by Faye. Faye, I'll let you introduce yourself as well.
So welcome everyone. As David said, we're looking forward and excited to share some of our key learnings gained over a combined experience base of over 50 years. That's a long time.
That's a long time when you say it, 50 years.
Yeah, I have learned that supporting salespeople and enabling their success through individual change journeys empowers people and drives their desire for knowledge, change, and success. So growing change capabilities through your organisations is a very critical factor to consider for sales success. So over to you, David.
Yes. All right. So just a little bit of background why you should listen to us, I guess. 3 times I've been fortunate enough to lead sales organizations and had a responsibility to deliver 1 billion plus sales budgets. It was in various industries. One was the chemical industry, one was aerospace and telecommunications. So I've certainly been exposed to running big sales teams across a whole lot of categories, which has been a great time and lots of serious learnings in that area. Faye's most recent project was to push out $1 billion technology deployment to thousands of customer-facing teams. So again, both of us have extensive background in driving change through teams and improving results, which is what today is about. We now both are directors at Sentia, and today's webinar isn't really going to be about Sentia, but it's certainly, Sentia is a specialist sales process and technology provider, which right at the end, if we've got some time, I'll give you an overview. But as I said, it's not an advertisement for our business. It's more about getting some content on how you can improve the performance of your sales teams. So where this information came from, the majority of this information came from a business that Faye and I founded some years ago, which was a very successful multinational sales outsourcing business. And I'll go into a little bit more detail there, but in effect, what that business was a 20-year adventure in maximizing the performance of sales teams. So with no further ado, we'll get right into that. So the webinar's title is The Secret of Super Sales Teams, and that's exactly what we're going to cover off today. So what are the secrets and what's a super salesperson to begin with? So with that in mind, let me just throw up a statistic. Right now, and this is pretty current, this was in Harvard Business Review, and every single stat that I give you during the presentation has been sourced and is referenced on the slides. So at the end, you'll have an opportunity to get the slides from us and you can hunt them down if you want to check them, but they're all pretty recent statistics. And according to Harvard Business Review, 4% of the salespeople in the USA sell 94% of the goods and services. It was a major metadata study that they completed. And that's a shocking number when I saw it. I knew from my experience that there was a small number of every sales team that killed the performance of everyone else. But 4% selling 94%, even I wouldn't have imagined. Now, I know that doesn't add to 100 and it's not meant to. So what it's basically saying is the other 96% of salespeople sell only 6% of the goods and services. So 4% are doing all the work. So I'll just let that sit with you for a minute. What are the other 96% doing day to day? And again, I'm going to run through some stats on just what a typical salesperson, not in the 4%, spends their time on. So last year, only about 24% of salespeople met or exceeded their quota. Now, I know last year was a tough year. Things were starting to improve, but that's a scary number. That's based on quotas that were no doubt adjusted for the conditions that we all suffered coming out of COVID. So 24% met or exceeded their quota, 76% did not. So what are they doing? Some other key stats. This one's from HubSpot. 80% of sales require 5 follow-up calls to land, to be made. And only 44% of salespeople are giving up after only 1 follow-up call. And there's a whole lot of reasons behind that. I won't go into it, but salespeople are reluctant to continue pressing forward and chasing down buyers. Sales reps can spend up to 40% of their time looking for somebody to sell to, and that's from InsideSales.com. So 60% of their time, they kind of know what they're doing. 40% of the time, they don't really even know where to turn. And one last stat, salespeople spend just 1/3 of their day actually selling, actually talking to prospects. Further backing that up is this chart that Salesforce published on their blog a couple of months ago. And it pretty much confirms the same thing. So every single salesperson that you have in your team, on average, 64% of the time is spent on non-sales activities. So only 1/3 of their time is spent selling. 2/3 is spent doing a whole lot of other things that do not lead to sales. So, they're scary numbers, but it goes some of the way towards explaining why 4% are doing all the work and generating and reaping the rewards, and the majority of our sales teams just aren't. So why were we so vested in determining what this 4% did? What were their secrets? As I mentioned at the start, Faye and I founded a sales outsourcing agency. So basically what we did was we created teams that would represent brands in stores, and ordinarily those brands would have staff on their own books, as well as hiring staff through us, and us providing teams as well. So in effect, what that meant was they would outsource part of their sales teams to us, and the other half would remain on their own books. If you could excuse me for 1 minute, I just had a note to say that no one can see our presentation at the moment. So I'll just pause for 1 second and sort that out. Give me 1 moment. Okay, I think it's all sorted again. So I'll go back to the starting point, because I got a message on my end, and apparently our presentation, a live stream, dropped for a moment. But just to recap, we set up a sales staffing business. We had 50 to 60 teams that we built for a whole lot of brands. Some of those brands I've included on this slide here. And our business only succeeded if we managed to outperform the sales teams that these brands had on their own books. So for instance, Harley-Davidson had a team of salespeople. They would outsource some other salespeople to us. And it was critical that the sales teams we built for them outperformed their teams. So our business only succeeded and could charge a margin for our reps if our reps did a much better job than the reps working for each of these brands. So we had a vested interest in determining what makes a great salesperson. Okay, so 4% of salespeople are selling 94% of the goods and services. Our business success depended on our salespeople outperforming most other sales teams. Therefore, we wanted to understand what makes a super salesperson just so awesome. We then wanted to take those traits, if we could uncover them, and clone them across the rest of our teams, therefore creating teams of super salespeople, obviously. So we set out to uncover their secrets. The critical point is, though, those super salespeople, the 4%, do not like sharing their secrets at all. They just don't like telling people what they do that gets them their results. They're very competitive. So it wasn't an easy task. So we set up with this group, with this sales outsourcing agency we had with our 50, 60 teams of reps. We set about taking a sampling of them, all the really great ones, and putting them in a project group with ourselves to try and uncover what they did that made them so amazing as salespeople. The project took 3 years. So for 3 years, we logged their activity. We carried out project meetings every month. We did loads of one-on-one interviews, a lot of analysis and deep dives into their performance. And we eventually got to the point where we had a manifesto that uncovered exactly what they did that was so different to the majority of salespeople. And it came down to three key aspects. The first was there were three processes that they all seemed to do, they all had in common, that made such a major difference for them in terms of sales results. There were also, coincidentally, three practices that they had found worked that they continued to adopt. So three processes, three practices. Finally, there were some competencies that they had that made a difference as well. So it wasn't a simple answer, it wasn't kind of a one-liner, but there were some processes, practices, and some competencies that made it all the difference to their sales performance. In terms of the competencies, some of them were born with these competencies, but they, even if they were or were not, they all took time to nurture and develop them. They knew that they were key to sales results. And in most cases, these salespeople were earning significant incentive payments, commissions. So they knew what worked and what didn't because it affected their bottom line. So processes, practices, and competencies, and that's what we're going to reveal today, these things, made all the difference to their sales result and put them in that top 4%. Okay, once we had that down pat in our manifesto, we created a system built on these traits to try and push them out to all of our other teams in the field. Okay, so what were these magical processes? So the first one was systems. What was common to all of the really great sales performers was that each and every one of them, in their own way, had a system and they followed it diligently. And that system was designed to ensure they were efficient and as productive as they could possibly be each and every day. Now, by system, I don't necessarily mean software. What I mean is they'd come up with a methodology, a system every day that they followed, and it worked for them. Some used paper diaries, some used Excel spreadsheets, some used file cards. Some of these great salespeople were mature, so they weren't necessarily on computers every single day, but they had a system that worked for them. They knew their system intimately and they stuck to it because it gave results. The second point that they all had was automation. Because they were doing far more work than a normal salesperson, and they knew they had to do more work than a normal salesperson, they automated that work as much as possible. So by automation, again, I don't necessarily mean software. Some of them would outsource things. There was a couple of the really great salespeople who were more mature, who would outsource their reporting necessity that our company placed on them to their partners, their wives. Excuse me. Some of them would outsource them to virtual assistants that they had on the side. So they'd say, look, I can't waste my time doing that admin piece, like 2/3 of the other reps. 2/3 of the time for other reps. So I outsourced it. Some of them would delegate it. Some of them had inside sales resources they could lean on, and they would delegate some of those non-productive tasks. And some of them were comfortable using software for that automation piece. So we had systems that they used, and they automated as much of their work as possible. The third process, and this was super important, and they all had this down pat, was they knew how to prioritize their actions every single day. They would always be focusing on the most valuable activity they could do next through their day. And there were several ways they arrived at that. Some of them there was one gentleman in particular who would spend an hour and a half every morning before work, so from 6 a.m. till 7:30, working through his paper diary in his case, and determining what he needed to do that day, and then ordering those tasks in order of the most valuable to him, most valued to him. So prioritizing it by value. They weren't always tasks that were the most productive. They were everything he needed to do, but he always focused on the most valuable task first. And he knew the cost of doing every single task. So he actually knew what it cost him to do a report for management. He knew what it cost him in terms of lost opportunities. So they prioritized their day, always focusing on the most valuable activities. I think it might have been Teddy Roosevelt, but I could be wrong, who came up with a system of always focusing on urgent, important, and not urgent, important tasks, and not worrying about the others so much. And these guys did this intuitively, guys and girls. So as I said, non-productive tasks they do, but in most cases, they would push them out to weekends or do it outside business hours. They They knew intuitively, they knew that 9 to 5 was their selling hours and nothing would get in the way of that. And through every one of those 9 to 5 business days, they would work on the most valuable activities. So it was they were like machines in that regard. It was amazing to see. Secondly, so they were kind of the processes they followed, and then there were practices that they found worked. So woven in amongst those were some practices. The first thing was attentiveness. Every single prospect they had was handled equally. Now, I know that sounds a little at odds with the previous point about prioritization, but when they did engage with a prospect, even if it was a lesser value to them, they treated them the same. They got the same level of attention. They knew that a contact today who may be a small prospect or no prospect at all that just wants some of their time, or from a smaller account, could tomorrow go to and become a major prospect or an account. Or it may be that they referred them to someone who made them a lot more money. So they treated every prospect equally, no matter who they were, no matter what value they were. They just would push them down their priority list each day. So when they did engage with a prospect, that prospect was handled equally, no matter what. Secondly was diligence. And again, it's a slightly different point to attentiveness. No prospect or account was ever forgotten. So the systems I mentioned were all about making sure that every single prospect and every single account that they had got attention. So it wasn't a matter of they'd be given a lead and forget to follow up in a month or two, or someone would say to them, reach out in 6 months. 6 months to the day, they had a system that made sure they did reach out to that prospect. And occasionally, they would reach out at the 6 month point and said, look, you asked me to reach out 6 months. It's exactly 6 months. Here I am. So they set in place systems that let them do that, and they were diligent about that. They never forgot a prospect. They never neglected a prospect. And finally, warmth. And some of them were born with this and others nurtured it, but they genuinely enjoyed contact with prospects like this. I like presenting on the webinar. They liked that interplay. They liked people. So they came across as warm. They came across as listening, and that helped a lot with rapport building and trust. It's tough to kind of fake that stuff. So they enjoyed contact with people. They always followed up with every single prospect and account. And they always gave them the same level of attention when they're engaged with them. The prioritization piece was about, well, what do I do next? And these 3 practices and 3 processes were interwoven with each other. So it was quite a task to kind of condense down these things into 3 processes, 3 practices, but they definitely were there amongst the whole team of super salespeople. The last aspect of it was competencies, and some of them were born with these competencies, but all of them still work to develop them and nurture them. So it's fascinating to see. So the first one sounds obvious today, but remember, some of these super salespeople were quite mature. So they were using consultative selling methods long before consultative selling methods hit LinkedIn and the vernacular. The consultative selling model was native to them. It was natural to them. So 20, 30 years ago, they were doing this before the sort of 10, 15 years ago, the rest of the world discovered it. So they were always listening and asking questions. They were always focusing on adding value, not worrying about the cost of their solutions. They were always trying to customize solutions for their customers. And they were all about long-term relationships, becoming trusted advisors for their accounts and prospects, as opposed to what most salespeople do, which is have a reasonably standard sales pitch, be very product focused, and just a pump and dump, wanting to sell something in a hurry. So they always did this consultative selling, and they developed these skills and were nurturing these skills on an ongoing basis. Secondly, sales technology. They were always on top of sales technology. And today, when I say technology, everyone's thinking CRM and computers and software. That's not what I meant. What I meant was they were the first to incorporate cell phones. They were the first to use fax machines, which were a thing once. They were the first to use Excel spreadsheets for tracking data. And they're the first to use software where it adds value. These guys, these super salespeople, do not see the current crop of CRMs as adding a load of value to them for some other reasons we'll talk about later. But when they find technology that works for them, they're on it. They're the first ones to sign up for email and use it to market. So they're all for technology only when it works, because they've got crystal focus on making the most sales and the most revenue for the time they have. The third competency that they nurture is they don't need other people's approval. And if you've had any in your team, you'll know what I mean. They don't hold back because of a need to be liked. They'll tell you what they think. It doesn't stop them with customers asking hard questions. They're not worried about what people will think of them if they ask a question that may appear like they're unknowledgeable. They don't have a problem with people pushing back and rejecting them time and time again. They'll cheerfully continue on. They can handle that rejection. They don't have that need for other people's approval. Focus was key as well. They always stay in the moment. So they use active listening skills. When they're speaking to a contact or an account or a prospect or a colleague for that matter, they're always listening. They're trying to get better at their craft. They're focused. So when they're talking to a prospect, that prospect has their entire attention span. It shines through in that even amongst their friends, they'll be known as good listeners. Like they want to hear people's story and then be processing at the same time to try and work through how they can add value to that story. So that was a key competency that they nurture. Another one was personal accountability. They don't blame other people if their results aren't stellar. They don't blame the company or the product or their colleagues or marketing. They know that it's up to them to make the results. So they don't make excuses for their results. They just refocus and try harder next time. And that was consistent to all of the top sales performers. They're motivated, and that probably goes without saying. They want success. They see it as a game. They want to work all of these things, the processes, practices, and these competencies to win. And so they're very motivated to deliver results, but they stay within the bounds of all of these other traits mentioned. They're not going to make a sale at the cost of all these other things that I mentioned, because longer term, that won't bring them success. So, what is it that makes the 4% super? So when this project came to an end, we had this manifesto and it detailed these things. There were processes, as I spoke about. There were practices that they all intuitively followed and had integral to their operation every day. And they'd nurtured these competencies. And basically that led to far superior results to the rest of the team. So we always get asked, okay, so you worked out this manifesto, you worked out these traits of the super salesperson, and then you had this staffing agency with 50, 60 teams of reps out in the field. What happened? Did you make use of it? And yes, we did. So once we uncovered these secrets, we set about making them work for the rest of the team. So we had at that stage, when this project finished, about 45 separate teams of reps, all between 15 and 25 strong, representing those brands that I had on an earlier slide. So we had to come up with a project ourselves to take these findings and learn how to deploy it to our team. So we had lots of attempts to systemize these three aspects. And in the end, we succeeded with about 22 of those teams. Some of the brands had requirements for us that we would restrict what we could do with these salespeople. But basically, for 22 of our teams, we re-engineered their performance. We built some software that helped with some of these things, which I'm happy to talk about later. And we managed to get 22 of our teams improved over 3 or 4 test runs and false starts. The outcomes we got once these changes were deployed in those teams, and we could emulate the performance of the 4%, the super salespeople, were amazing. So basically, the teams that we deployed in the field, where we were able to deploy our software that made sure they prioritized on the most valuable prospects and accounts, the software that made sure that no one was forgotten and always followed up, and a few other aspects of the project, delivered 26% additional revenue. So it led to our staffing business getting significantly more spend from our brands because our team was selling a lot more of their product. We improved their productivity considerably by 34%. And there were several ways we managed to do that. We put a lot more time back in their day. So we were saving on average 2 hours per day. If you remember back to about the third slide I showed, around about 17 or 18% of a salesperson's time is spent doing admin. So that's about 1 day in 5, 1 day a week. If you manage to do away with almost all of that admin, you can give back that 1 day a week. That's 17 hours a week. So it was easy to deliver 2 hours time back per day by almost removing all the admin, data entry, all that sort of stuff with some really unique software that we developed. And finally, system adoption. As I said, super salespeople love technology if it works for them. So the tools that we developed to emulate their performance, they rapidly jumped on, as did the rest of the teams. So we went from, in our case, our software layer was installed on top of a CRM. We went from CRM adoption of sort of 26, 27, 28%, which is pretty normal for daily use, up to 94%. So all of a sudden, our technology became a value to these salespeople, and they were using it every single day. So it was significant changes and huge benefits. So Sentia. So that's the, I guess that's the core of the lessons we learned from this project, practices, processes, and competencies. Most of these things you can deploy into your own business. So I'm happy to send you a copy of the recording of the webinar. I'm happy to send you the slides. We're happy to give you some advice. No obligation to use our services, but that's basically what we do in our business, Sentia. We've taken these learnings from these super salespeople, and we're deploying those learnings for our clients. So we're re-engineering a whole lot of parts of their business. So I've just got a message regarding some questions. We've got a couple that came in earlier. So if you bear with me just 1 second, I will run through a couple of the earlier questions. And then, as I said, happy to send it through and to anyone who wants a copy of the webinar. And then I'll follow up in a few minutes and talk about Sentia for anyone who's interested in our business, because I really wanted this webinar to be about the content and less about us. So one of the questions we got sent in earlier for the webinar was, how do you know when you should formally review your sales process? Is it when revenue is declining, when you get complaints about software, equipment, lead gen? What are the triggers that I can't ignore and know when I need to relook at process? So the answer is in our content here. Basically, the time to look at sales process is every year. You really cannot set in place the sales process in your business and leave it fixed all the time. It needs to be continually reviewed, especially over the last 3 or 4 years. All of our businesses have had some major changes, and it's important that your process gets reviewed at least annually, ideally by someone outside externally to your business. And I'm not necessarily pushing for Sentia to come in and fix your problems, but someone externally should look at your process, because we can test it against best practice and make sure that what you're doing, firstly, is what is actually happening, and secondly, is what is world's best practice in your industry and category. I have one other question. Sales continue to grow, but staff refuse to use sales systems. What's an acceptable sales rep adoption? So I kind of touched on this in the content. Sales teams will not use technology unless it adds value. There's a great article by Nancy Narden on LinkedIn, which I'm sure if you do a Google search, it'll pop up, saying how the CRM in particular is not adopted by salespeople because they don't perceive it to work for them. Salespeople are great at grabbing technology when it works. They were not reluctant to use email. They're not reluctant to use cell phones. They're just reluctant to use CRM because they see it adds a lot of work and not very much value. So if you want them to use your software, you have to make sure that the software is adding value for you, and that's part of what we do at Sentia. So that's kind of the questions that came in beforehand. What I will do is talk a little bit about our business, Sentia. So if you kind of don't want the paid advertisement, you can move on now. But let me give you a quick overview of what we do, because it was based on this core learnings from this project over the 3 years. So firstly, sales process. To fit with what the 4% do, it's critical that your sales process matches their practices and processes. So what we do at Sentia is we do a deep dive with you on your process and make sure that it's at world's best practice. Make sure that it's meeting all of your sales team's needs and your business needs. And we can come on board and share what other players do in your space. Secondly, your software platform. And I spoke about CRM just there. Salespeople will not adopt a CRM until it adds value for them. So it's important that if you're beginning with a CRM, that it has the capability to be configured for you and customized for them, their needs. So you must have the right platform. So we can do an audit of that. We're a Salesforce partner ourselves, but we can work with other CRMs. But it's important that it's enterprise grade, that it's consistent and configurable and customizable. or there's not really much point. It won't add value for your team. The third piece is data. It's really important that you remove the need for your team to do any unnecessary data entry. There's a whole lot of automation that can be done on data, and it needs to be clean. So the data that is in your CRM or your Outlook or your Excel spreadsheets needs to be accurate, and it needs to be cleaned up, duplicates removed, and we can do all that for you. We have a software layer we built based on the 4% practices called Sentia, and our website lays out a lot of detail for you. But basically what it does is it works through, for a salesperson, it works through all of their accounts and prospects, and then produces a simple, clean user interface within your CRM now that tells them what to do every day to make the most money, prioritize all that information. So we can happily provide a demo of that for you, but it will completely change the operation of your sales team. The fifth aspect that we do in our projects is implementation, training, and support. When you're bringing through changes like this to sales process or your sales software, it's important that it's deployed appropriately, that you provide your team with training and support at an ongoing basis. And we can do that for you at Sentia. And finally, rinse and repeat. So you can't have a project like this completely change your systems and then walk away and configure it and consider it done. It's important that this be a cycle, that you're always relooking at sales process. You're always looking at your platforms and your automation piece, and that you're always making sure your team is supported and trained as you make changes. And that's basically what we do at Sentia. So we become a partner for you, and we take on these 6 steps for you on an ongoing basis. So we don't build a piece of software and sell it to you and walk away. We become a virtual part of your business that handles your sales software / process and make sure that it's always serving your team's need and your business needs. And as I said, adoption will come after that. So that's kind of an overview of what we do at Sentia. I really appreciated the opportunity to present our webinar to you today. Happy to take any questions after the webinar. You can still leave comments. You can find me on LinkedIn there, David Forder at Sentia. And thank you so much for giving us part of your day today. Really appreciate it. And I know Faye and Dave Brown did as well, watching the chat there. So thank you, everyone.